I'm Hannah Reeves, director of Sager Broaddus Gallery in Columbia, Missouri. On March 1st, 2020, conceptual artist, writer, and filmmaker Alix Lambert began an artist residency with Sager Broaddus Gallery. Shortly after, she returned to Brooklyn for what was supposed to be a brief visit home and found herself in lockdown there in the epicenter of the pandemic, unable to return to the residency in Missouri, at least in the traditional sense. I continued conversations with Alix, and the nature of the work she'd undertake changed shape as the virus moved to the forefront of all our lives. Perspectives on a Pandemic is the project and original work of Alix Lambert, bringing a variety of voices on our current global situation. It is a production of the Sager Broaddus Gallery Artist in Residence program in KVIA.
This week on Perspectives on a Pandemic, my guest is Joe Loya. As a boy, in the early 70s, Joe dreamt of becoming a philosophy professor or a theologian. He loved ideas and words. His preacher father prepared him for academia by teaching him both Greek and Latin. In 1971, when Joe was 9 years old, Joe's beloved mom died after prolonged, painful illness. Joe's memoir, The Man Who Outgrew His Prison Cell, tells the story of how his home life turned brutal until he picked up a steak knife and plunged it into his father's neck. The book details his subsequent descent into crime, culminating with a 30-bank heist spree and eventual arrest. He ended up in solitary confinement for almost 2 years. He discovered his voice on the page, and the trajectory of his life was permanently altered. 3 years later, he re-entered society and became contributing editor for the Pacific News Service. Please welcome Joe Loya.
How you doing, my friend? I'm now recording. Go on. Yes, good to talk with you.
I'm always so happy to talk to you. So I just want to tell the people who are listening a little bit about how we met first. I met Joe Loya, extraordinary writer and dear friend now, many years ago, over a decade, I think. Over a decade, maybe 15 years ago. A mutual friend introduced us because he knew about our mutual interest in prison memoirs, and our first phone conversation went on for a very long time, talking about prison memoirs, and I felt like we just got along so great, and we became friends.
Instant friends.
And since then, we've collaborated on many things, including most recently, Joe wrote this beautiful introductory essay for a book of mine about the courtroom experience.
I love that book.
But I follow you on Instagram, and since this whole horrible time has started for everybody, with stay-at-home orders and social distancing, you've been posting kind of tips on surviving isolation that have stemmed from your time in prison and your time in solitary.
Yeah.
And I just have found them really great and compassionate and smart and also sometimes funny and really helpful. And so I definitely want to talk about that. But I first wanted to talk to you about the language surrounding that, because when I first started following people who were tweeting and writing things, there was a lot of language that is in language of incarceration. Oh, we're all on lockdown. Some people who feel like this is not appropriate. And so I guess I wanted to start with asking you about that before we move on to the tips.
Everyone's allowed whatever view they want to take on whatever they want to, their experience. I'm not going to say that there's one right way to look at it or wrong way to look at it. I will say that as an ex-criminal who was not an accidental criminal, meaning I had no criminal, I didn't belong to a gang. Didn't belong to any drug milieu. No one in my family had been to prison. I turned myself into a criminal, and because I wanted to go make bank. I didn't have a drug addiction underwriting it. I wanted to be transgressive. I wanted to be somebody who was breaking the rules. And so when I stopped committing crime and said I didn't want to do that anymore, I still wanted to have my mind in service of crossing lines and blurring things. And one thing I realized right away when I decided to change my life was that most people on the planet, their minds and their brains are in service of constantly looking for the obvious distinctions between things. That's how we come up with the whole other phenomenon, where you otherize other people. You turn them into not you, and here's why you're not me. And
Right.
to me, that's the laziest thinking. That's why everyone could do it. And that's why most people do it. It is the laziest option. And I feel like my mind is in service of trying to be transgressive in that way. I don't want to think like that. And so what my mind is constantly doing is trying to look for the hidden likeness in everything, which is the poetic sense as well. But the poet tries to do that. And so I challenge myself and I challenge others to think like that. Oh, you were never in prison, so you can't use language of bondage and emancipation like I can. And like, that's just a bunch of bullshit to me. For me, my brain just rebels against that. I don't think that way. When we got locked down, my first instinct was like, hey, welcome to my wheelhouse. You all are going to be where I was. This is where I thrive. I know how all of a sudden to be in a place, and I just look for the hidden likenesses.
And can you talk about those? Because that's interesting to me.
You're not in lockdown you're not in solitary confinement. You're not in the situation I was in. They're not bringing food to your cell, opening your cell trap, sliding the food in 3 times a day. They're not giving you only 1 hour out of your cell, and it's not that. But there are things in common. What are the hidden likenesses? And that's why I go for that. I'm not the prisoner who says you can't think like, you can't use these words. So let's use those words. For example, one of the things that happens when I got locked down, I got taken out, I was arrested. My ex-cellmate had been murdered. The prison went locked down. I was in the yard at the time, and they got us all, and they all put us they locked down all the units, and then they locked down the prison. We were locked outside in the yard, and then they just ushered us into the auditorium. And then it was time for lunch. So they ushered us all into the chow hall, and they started feeding us. And while we were in there, all these guards rush in. They came looking. They all got pictures. They grab me, and they take me and lock me down in solitary confinement. Now, I don't know what's going on. I didn't know that my ex-cellmate had been murdered in his unit in his cell. I'd find out by the end of the night, but then they ended up arresting 5 other Mexican guys that same night. So we're all in lockdown for almost 2 years. So first thing you do when you get locked in that cell, they open the door, open cell 18, close cell 18. You go inside and you realize I have no property, nothing. They're going to come and they're going to give me a sheet. They're going to come and give me a pillow. I have nothing in here. So you wait. Now what happens is immediately you can't worry about what's outside of the walls. You have to worry about that space. You have to lock down and say, okay, well, here's what I got. What's here? I got a toilet. I got a sink. I got a bunk. I got a floor. Got some toilet paper right there. And I got a little desk right here. Tiny little desk with a little stool that pulls out. You see, what do? You get busy. You own that space. You get some of the toilet paper in your hand, wet it a little bit, and you get on your hands and knees and you wipe the floor. You just wipe it of all the dust bunnies. You just get that floor clean. That's your floor. You wipe it down. You look at the sink. Like you do that. Then they finally start bringing you your soap, shampoo, and you start asking this guy on the tier. He's called a runner. He like sweeps the tier, and sometimes he's able to pass things back and forth. And you see what the routine is going to be. Hey, when do we go to showers? Oh, we go shower 3 times a week. When do we go? We go Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Okay, we'll try to get what your routine is, but you're concentrating solely on here. You don't have any of the luxuries that you had when you were in the basic prison population. You could get cigarettes. You could get, somebody in the unit had a store where you could go get Snickers. You can go get chips. You can go 2 for 1. You would get 1 and you owe him 2 at canteen. Like there's all these things that are going on where you have to focus right where you are in that unit. Get some information from the runner about when you shower, when you go to rec. Just own that. Like you have to concentrate that. You can't worry about that. What's out there. You can't worry about what you were thinking about for visits, what you were going to have over there. You were going to wait looking for what you were looking forward to. You have to go whoop. I'm right here, because all that stuff will drive you crazy. That happens when you're in there. You can't worry about when you're going to get out. Can't. Or else the calendar will harass you. As it is, we're really good about that as prisoners, because when we go to prison in general, nobody has calendars on their walls. That'll drive you crazy. That whole movie trope where they have like the guy crossing out the date, that does not happen. You do not. That calendar will harass you. It's a watch pot doesn't boil kind of thing, right? So we're kind of already trained when we get in a lockdown, like, okay, I can't worry about when I'm going to get out. I'm going to get out when I'm going to get out. They now have complete ownership of this investigation. And you try to just bring everything down, make everything small. You concentrate on the next step. You look at your feet. What's in front of me? What do I do now? You don't try to go global. What does it mean? What's going to happen? Well, no, you can't. You focus. Let me get this stuff done. And then you start you do your exercises. You get a routine. You make your bed when you get up, and you only lay in it once for a nap once a day, and you don't sit in that thing again, because that thing becomes quicksand. That thing it'll just suck you in, right? And so you own the space. Play concentration games. I would sit there and look at one spot for as long as I could. Whatever. The point I'm making is that when you're in there, you do not have access to the things you had before, and you have to get right with it as soon as possible. As soon as possible.
These are some of the things that are interesting to me, because I think, I'm such a notorious introvert,
Yeah.
but I think psychologically it's such a different thing from saying, oh, I'm going to take a week and be away from people.
That's the hidden likeness. People are like, oh, well, you could still do all these things. Yeah, but what happened is this circumstance is so severe, and it has been foisted on you that your limitations. That's why you're like me when I went to solitary confinement. That's what point I'm trying to make. I get it when the body wants to bump up against, like, hey, I don't have the freedom I had yesterday. I can't just get up, go here, go to the gym, lift some weights, get some aggression on. I can't play basketball at night. I got to be by myself. And even though I like to be by myself, it was the same as you. It was foisted on me. I was stripped immediately of a lot of things. And that kind of vertigo sets in which, even though you're good at it, you have to have a period of adjusting to it. And that's one of the hidden likenesses. And that's what I was trying to say. I've helped my daughter through this by explaining these things to her. Like, oh, I get what you're going through. It's not the same intensity. You're not lying in bed at night afraid that a guard's going to open your cell when you're asleep and let another guy open his cell so he can come in here and stab you. You're not afraid of that like I was. But, so, it's a different circumstance, but it is still... There were still many things in common. And one of them is what I just mentioned about the bed, that if you're not careful, that great thing about Nietzsche said, if you stare into the abyss is staring into you. If you're not careful, around the edges,
the bed is staring into you.
The bed is staring at you, saying, you know what, I think you think you're sleeping on me. I'm going to start sleeping on your ass, man. I'm going to absorb you. You're like, you end up becoming like something in those movies.
That's for sure a similarity, because I got to get out off my bed every day.
Yeah, you have. It's a thing, right? And the other thing too is I wrote a thing when it first happened saying how to survive solitary confinement. And one of the things I said was like, and rub one out every day. That was one of my things. The other thing was like, and scrub your junk every day. Scrub your junk every day. And then it was like the third or fourth thing. And then the eighth thing was like, did I say scrub your junk? Scrub your junk every day, man.
It is a third, fourth, and eighth.
Here's the thing is that and it's metaphorical too, but it's also a thing. Like in prison, you only get 3 showers a week, but you still have to burn back. You still want to be in front of that. You exercise. So you lay your t-shirt down, you stand on that, and you're at the sink. You're scrubbing up. You're scrubbing everything. You got to scrub, because you don't want to feel like you're in squalor, even though it's squalid conditions. You personally want to have as much ownership. I think it's like a mental health thing. Just scrub so that you feel less squalid in a super squalid. Because that's, again, you don't want to fall. That's what you're trying to prepare against. And the other thing is, I recommend don't get caught. When you're in solitary confinement, they take you to the bathroom at the corner of the tier. You don't want to get caught singing Morrissey in the shower. That's another thing. You don't want to come back to your cell. And all the guys are looking at you like, what the fuck? What do you mean every day is not like Sunday? Every day is like Sunday. We're in solitary.
It's very quick before you go, I don't know what day it is.
Exactly. Every day is like Sunday.
This sense of vertigo, like I feel like there's been an actual physical response where I feel this off balance sense of like the world just kind of disappearing, like almost in a science fiction movie, just literally disappearing outside
That's
the
good.
walls of my apartment, which is about you saying you have to concentrate on what is still there. But I feel that, and it
You know what you're
makes me
feeling?
feel wonky.
What you're feeling in every major spiritual tradition. It doesn't matter what it was. It doesn't matter if it's in China. It doesn't matter if it started. What doesn't matter what river civilization it started at. And every one of them, solitude is where a higher harmony was allowed to assert itself, which means shit has to go away before something could assert itself. It needs to move. Shit needs to move out of the way so it can assert itself. And in solitude, in all those religions, people have breakthroughs. And the reason they have breakthroughs is they start realizing, oh, all that shit that I thought was indispensable, look at me. I'm fucking living with shit. It's dispensable, which means I'm like this close to realizing most of the shit out here that I value is an illusion. And that, when you get to that place, you're forced to confront a whole new reality, a whole new circumstance of life. This is where values change in cultures and everything. People, when they come out of these things, they have a whole different feeling about things that they would have bothered them before.
And also a feeling about things that, yeah, I feel like there's all this time to kind of have process your, or not process, but just wallow in guilt and shame and regrets. And like there's too much, you're really with yourself.
It's all with you. What I said about confinement, as I said, the density of the confined space where you're just right there, it crushes all the clutter in your head. So like all of a sudden I couldn't watch TV. I could only read books that came into my cell. Or, if I by the time I got a phone, within a month I was having books sent to me, but for a while, I could not choose what entertained me. I just had to like, hey man, you got a book? And then sometimes the library would bring a book cart through and I would just grab whatever I could. Not that I would have chosen it before, but I didn't have very many options. So the density of this confined space, I'm talking about when you're in your house and you don't have distractions. You can be in the world. You're not going to the gym. You're not getting, I think half the reason these people are falling apart because they can't go get their nails done, their hair done, it's all distraction. Notice most of that stuff is like superficial things. There's nothing essential about it. You don't need to go to a restaurant to eat. We're all eating in our houses. We don't need to get our nails done. We're not going clubbing. We're not, like there's a lot of things in which when you don't have them, you start realizing the value of them. And what was great for me,
and what they were filling.
What you start realizing that they are superficial themes. They're not the real part of who you're about, what you're about. In fact, what you're about is growing out in your hair. You see the real color of your hair. You see the real, like that's who you really are. You start confronting yourself kind of in a metaphorical way. You really start confronting who you are, not who you present to the world, but who you really are. It's maddening to a lot of people. People have gone mad in that situation and are going mad. We have a mental health crisis because of this. But I do think that there is something to be said for if we want emancipation of any kind, we have to go through this thing where we question the categories that we lived by before. And the vertigo that you're feeling, I would recommend, is this point where if we were to do this for a year, people would come out of this, and half the people who walked out of it, I think, would walk away, turn back to their house, and bow to their house and thank the house for all the lessons that they were taught by that silence or by that time alone and all that crushing solitude or the crushing, forced, lockdown, whatever. People would learn things about themselves and grow through it over time. Like we know when people do have long periods of solitude, they're not the same. One of my favorite scenes in the Tom Hanks movie where he got shipwrecked, there's a scene where he comes back and they have this big hotel and they have this big spread and they got shrimp and all this, and the dude was starving to get fish and now they got this bowl of just like a bunch of shrimp and just help with the seafood in front of him. And he's just, it's night and he's lying on the floor. He's not even on the bed because the bed doesn't matter anymore. The bed was a comfort. He was marveling at the things that he had taken for granted before, because solitude. That's what I'm saying. You're changed by it, and you're being changed. The thing that you're talking about, I believe, is that.
Yeah, it's not just solitude. Like I was always obsessed with any kind of survival book. So like the book Alive about the team that crashes in the Andes, and they have to, and then they all, if you read their interviews following up when they got back to civilization. None of them slept in beds because they were used to being all crowded
Hmm.
in the fuselage, and they
Hmm.
couldn't find comfort in a bed. They had trouble walking because they had been walking on snow for months, and they were like all, there was a lot of like, I think it was 3 months that they were in the Andes, but there was an enormous amount of this kind of change, not from solitude because they were together, but from
But
an
but
extreme
confinement.
situation.
My daughter just finished a short documentary, which I can't wait to show you. It's a 20-minute documentary. It's called Life Hacks While Confined. She interviewed me because I was in solitary confinement. She interviewed my friend Jesse De La Cruz, who was an ex-member. He's an ex-member of the Mexican mafia called the Nuestra Familia. She interviewed Piper Kerman, Orange is the New
Oh,
Black.
great.
We were all confined in prison, but the reason she called it life hacks while confined as opposed to in prison is because the fourth guy she interviewed is Michael Scott Moore, who was held, another friend of mine who was held by Somali pirates for 2.5 years. And in there, he reveals that when he came out, he also couldn't walk. He tried to run to jog, and his legs had atrophied because they had him
Yeah.
sitting down most of the time, right? But also the thing about that is that what I loved about her choosing the word confinement is that she recognized that he wasn't imprisoned, but he was like us. He was forced to live in a circumstance in which he was confined, and so he came out of that an entirely changed person. It's a different way of valuing things and a different way of moving moving yourself through the world.
But in terms of some of the just actual little mechanisms, like you mentioned concentration, and now I'm reading again a lot, but the first, I don't know, 3 weeks, I couldn't concentrate on reading.
A lot of friends have told me that. Like we said, your mind was in flux. You were trying to find your footing. It's like being on those. You remember those when we were kids? I don't know if you ever went to one of those theme parks. Like the first one I ever went to, I tried this on was at Magic Mountain in Valencia. It's like it spins and spins and spins. At first, you're standing kind of against the wall, and then the faster it spins, they start pulling the floor out from under you, and now you're just stuck to the wall. But for a minute, when the store starts moving, you start trying to move your feet, and your feet are kind of dangling, like tiptoeing, and then boom, you don't have any floor underneath. I feel like it's that, or it's a,
That's a great description.
or what Foucault called epistemological thaw. Like, how do you know that you know anything is epistemology, right? But epistemological thaw is this interesting moment where it's not solid and it's not liquid. It's thaw. It's that one, no, it's that fraction between where it's neither nor or one or the other. That's what people had to do. They had to adjust. Some people are still doing it 9 weeks out. But I think a lot of people, they have to find their footing in the beginning because you have to. And you don't beat up yourself for that. You don't get upset. You shouldn't be upset about it. Nobody can just like through this. Even people like who have been habituated to doing time. I had to like find language for it. I had to find my footing. I had to kind of take note of all the energies that were around me. Like you were alone, but I had my wife all of a sudden was in the home. And my
Right.
wife walks softly on the planet. So it's not like this heavy duty energy. But it was another energy in the house that I now had to account for because she was doing her Zoom meetings and I could pick up her mood from that. And then I had to process that. And then her mood was dancing with my daughter's mood and I had to dance with that. And so I was like, whoa. So it's just like, it was the softest energy adjustment, but it was an energetic adjustment that I had to figure out on top of all this other shit that was going on inside of me.
I think Americans especially have this tendency to feel like I have to be productive all the time. I have to do stuff. I have to accomplish things. And the most productive thing you can kind of do right now is stay home.
Yeah.
And I think that sense of like, oh, I actually am doing something by staying home is lost on a lot of people.
Because I do feel like there's a real sort of Benjamin Franklin, like, gotta get a lot of things done. Let's look at
Yeah.
what are we supposed to do today? What do I feel like, is it harvest time or is it this? Do we do this? Like just, very, very, we can do it all. Let's do it all kind of, oh, well, we're
Right.
at it. Let's write this and let's discover this or whatever. And I feel like there is a sort of that about how people try to take care of themselves. And I feel like
Yeah.
they feel like they need to be doing a lot of things. But I do feel that we're bumping up against, sometimes if you're not doing anything, it's seen as you're lazy or whatever. And I feel that sometimes not doing something is actually sometimes the most heroic thing you can do. I said that once when I wrote a whole essay on that when I first got out of prison. See, some people, their heroism is not picking up the needle and not picking up the gun. Their heroism is an act of not doing.
I liked that Italian mayor who was like, "This is not I Am Legend. You're not Will Smith. Go home." This is, like standing there, like.
Yeah, I mean, anyway, as it is, we've seen all these people who are touting the gospel of, be prepared. We got to be prepared. They all get finally in lockdown, and they're like, I can't stand being inside, man. I got to get the fuck out, man. I got to get these preppers prepped for all the food. They got food for days. They prepped for all the guns. They got all the guns they need. What they didn't prep for was a wife that needed to go get her hair and nails done. Like, you got to get the fuck out of here, man. She would not. They prepped for everything except like real humans being humans in confinement. Like, what are they going to want? They're not going to want to just be locked down and prepped down. Like, you can't prepare for that. And so I don't think that anybody's really prepared for, including someone like me. This is a challenge. Even me, who's gone through it, sometimes it's challenging. But you have to manage it. And sometimes some of my best management days have been a day of 2 naps, of binge watching, I don't know, Westworld, Killing Eve, something. And, or the other day, for a day and a half, I binge watched Dead to Me. And then I came out of it and I was productive the next day. It was like, how did I just go from like being a slug on the couch to being so productive?
I find that too, the peaks and valleys, like, whole day was gone watching TV, but then the next day I was.
And you know what? I'm not hard on myself for that, because I'm finding that there is a different rhythm that is asserting itself in me now, because my energies are being used differently and being taxed differently. I'm actually feel like I'm using muscles that I haven't used before or haven't used in a long time. Well, this is a fantastic time for a lot of opportunities for not only us personally to reevaluate who we are. We can now have a really sober conversation about, hey, you know what? Most of those guys are in there for things that are no longer illegal. For one, a lot of the guys are in there for drug offenses with marijuana. In our state, I can go down the corner and buy marijuana if I want. All I got to do is cough and say, no, I'm kidding. I don't have to do that. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's not illegal here in the state. And so a lot of these laws, this is going to change so much about the way we can address some of these issues moving forward. Right now, it's terrible. Right now, I mean, it's terrible. I would hate to be in prison. In fact, because of my podcast, by the way, The Score, Bank Robber Diaries.
Yeah, please.
We haven't even begun to see how that's going to impact society, the prison component. It's going to be different. I mean, it's going to be different.
Since we've come back around to the tips for surviving solitary, what are some of the tips you've given your daughter that have been most received by her or appreciated?
We have to slow down. You have to pay attention to your body, your anxiety, like listen to yourself. Because if you want to be able to manage the noise in your body, you have to be listening. Where are you getting anxious? Where are you getting worried? And so you need to slow down. So one, you're receiving pulsations from around you with more awareness. The faster you go, the more things you're doing, the more calls you're on, the more things you're receiving too much data. Music was so good for me when I was in solitary. Oh my God, I discovered grunge. I was in Lewisburg Penitentiary. I was locked down in the hole in Lewisburg. It was one of the darkest periods of my life. And this little school, Bucknell, I think it was Bucknell University, up there by Harrisburg. At night, I would listen to their college station, and they were playing the fuck out of grunge. Screaming Trees, Alice in Chains, and Soundgarden and all that stuff, Pearl Jam. Just like music saved me when I was in there. And then there's one station where every Sunday would play 6 albums straight. They would start in the afternoon and they would just end, and you could just hear 6 full albums back to back. Just sit on your bunk in solitary, or sit on that chair in solitary, or in the night, sit in your lie in your bunk. So music is a big thing, right? You know, you find your soundtrack to your solitude, or find your soundtrack to your quarantine. Find the soundtrack to what this is now that helps you through it. Oh, and I tell her not to sing Morrissey in the shower.
Good advice. That's our tip for everybody. That's my tip for everybody. As a general tip.
Just don't get caught singing Morrissey. You could sing it, just don't
sing
get caught.
Morrissey in the shower.
I say that because I fucking sing Morrissey in the shower. I actually love Morrissey.
In addition to his memoir and his op-eds, Loya has written for theater, film, and television. He serves on the board of directors for a reentry program called Walden House. He has his own podcast, The Bank Robber Diaries, which you should definitely check out.